Okay, so you see, casting and welding are one of the very, very important subjects for your interview, and normally they are asked in the manufacturing or production processes. When you go for interview, they ask you the questions from this, and they ask the questions which normally tend to ignore when you prepare these subjects. They ask you question from the application. They ask you very simple question like if dentist is using surgical tools, what those tools are made up of. I mean, what is the process, casting process? Why investment casting is called investment casting? Have you seen the gas turbine blades? They are made up of what? Majority of tractor components, they are made up of what? I mean, what is the process for making that? Can you name five, welding defects? So, which welding process is most commonly used? Can you name some of the personal protective equipment used in the welding process? So in this particular technical snap which I had with Abe, I got a chance to ask him many questions from welding and casting. Most of you who are going for the interviews and are looking for really good questions from production engineering, because production engineering is a very vast subject and very interesting questions are asked from that. So students do not have the kind of questions which are normally asked. They think that written exam ki preparation and this is similar lines. Actually, it is not. In the interview, the approach is little different. Typical questions, almost 1 hour, rapid fire round kind of question for majority of the public sector interviews and campus placement interviews. Welding and casting go through this particular session, marathon snap, and I'm very sure you will get a couple of questions here. Try to answer these questions. So let's listen to the entire session now. Okay, so Abhay, let's proceed ahead with your technical snap for welding and casting. That is for freight corridor, dedicated freight corridor job, right?
Yes,
For
sir.
deputy manager job?
Sir, as junior manager.
Junior manager, okay. Okay, so let's start with the welding first.
Yes, sir.
Abhay, can you categorize the welding processes?
Sir, welding processes can be categorized on the basis of it is a thermal welding or it is a mechanical process that is being used for welding. Like, are we imparting heat directly or are we imparting heat through any mechanical
नहीं, मैं आपको
processes?
एग्जांपल देता हूँ. जैसे आर्क वेल्डिंग एक
Okay.
कैटेगरी है,
Yes, sir.
गैस वेल्डिंग भी एक कैटेगरी है.
Yes,
ऐसी
sir.
बहुत सी कैटेगरीज होती हैं वेल्डिंग की. कैन यू नेम
सर
दोस?
वही सर थर्मल के अंदर हमारी आ जाएगी डायरेक्टली गैस वेल्डिंग, आर्क वेल्डिंग और हमारी शील्डेड आर्क वेल्डिंग.
वो तो आर्क वेल्डिंग हो
जो
गया ना.
आर्क हाँ सर.
जरा सोच के आंसर
एक
कीजिए कि कौन कौन सी कैटेगरीज है वेल्डिंग की.
आर्क वेल्डिंग, गैस वेल्डिंग, प्रेशर वेल्डिंग, फ्रिक्शन वेल्डिंग और एक सर
सॉलिड
हमारी
स्टेट वेल्डिंग क्या होता है?
सॉलिड स्टेट वेल्डिंग सर. सर इसके अंदर हम अपने मेटल को डायरेक्टली मेल्ट नहीं करते, लाइक उसे हम हीट के एप्लीकेशन से मेल्ट नहीं करते, रादर हम वैक्यूम के अंदर उसको टाइटली जॉइन करते हैं ताकि वो एक दूसरे के अंदर डिफ्यूज हो सके मेटल.
स्पॉट वेल्डिंग
भी
कौन
इसे
सी
कह सकते
वेल्डिंग
हैं.
का एग्जांपल है?
So spot welding can be classified as a electrical resistance type welding where we pass
इलेक्ट्रिकल
a high.
रेजिस्टेंस.
Yes, sir. We take two thin metal sheets over each other and put those electrode in close contact with each other. Then we pass a very high current through them, and the resistance that it produce
कैन आई
at the
कॉल इट
intersection.
सॉलिड स्टेट वेल्डिंग?
The solid state welding, I'm not sure, sir. I'm sorry for that.
अच्छा, मेरे को फ्रिक्शन वेल्डिंग के बारे में कुछ बताइए.
So in friction welding, we use high speed and the high relative speed between the two surfaces, and then we put them together with a slightly huge amount of upsetting force. By that, a huge amount of friction is produced, which in turn produces heat that melts the metal at the contact, and thus thereby it joins the surfaces together.
आपके घर में वेल्डिंग कहाँ कहाँ पे आपको नजर आती है और कौन सी वेल्डिंग होती है?
So generally in our homes and in our residential areas, we tend to see the shielded metal arc welding much more. Though gas welding is also used sometimes, but the shielded arc welding is used much more. It can be used at the welding of the rails of balcony, and by making of iron gates, which are basically the entrances of our homes.
आपने प्रेशर कुकर देखा होगा?
Yes sir.
उसमें वेल्डिंग होता है क्या?
सर जो हमारा प्रेशर कुकर का हैंडल होता है, the handle that we have on pressure cooker, which is joined by the small whistle that we have, it is welded there.
Are you sure? It is welded or it is riveted?
So the handle is riveted, but that the junction that mounts the whistle, that is welded.
कौन सी वेल्डिंग होती है वो?
Sir, I don't know the exact process, but if I have to guess, I would be guessing it is either MIG or TIG type of welding, because it is a very high precision and very clean welding.
प्रेशर कुकर सिलेंड्रिकल होता है, राइट?
Yes sir.
उसमें वेल्डिंग होती है कहीं ज्वाइन करने के लिए?
सर प्रेशर कुकर जो हमारी बॉडी होती है, that I think it is made by drawing operation.
Which process?
Sir, drawing operation. Like
deep drawing.
we punch deep drawing. Yes sir, deep drawing.
और ये एलपीजी सिलेंडर देखा है आपने? एलपीजी सिलेंडर?
Yes sir.
उसमें तो वेल्डिंग होता है.
Yes sir.
तो क्या उसको हम डीप ड्राइंग से नहीं बना सकते? Something like pressure cooker.
Sir, when we use deep drawing, then we can't make two curve surfaces with exact type of forces. Like in pressure cooker, we have one surface that is curved, then there are cylindrical walls, and then there is the pressure cooker lid that sits upon them and locks the chamber, thus by creating an area for high pressure to exist. But in LPG cylinder, it is thicker than the pressure cooker. The vessel is thicker than the pressure cooker, and it has to sustain more pressure. So that kind of pressure cannot be sustained by that type of metal by interlocking, just by interlocking. The gas will eventually leak out.
प्रेशर कुकर कौन से मटेरियल का बना होता है?
सर प्रेशर कुकर हमारा लाइक जनरली अभी हम जैसे देख रहे हैं तो स्टील के या फिर एल्युमिनियम टाइप के आते हैं, स्टेनलेस स्टील के.
अच्छा, वेल्डिंग इलेक्ट्रोड्स देखे हैं आपने अबे?
यस सर.
व्हाट इज द साइज ऑफ द वेल्डिंग इलेक्ट्रोड्स?
सर वेल्डिंग इलेक्ट्रोड इज अराउंड 15 to 20 centimeter. It's about 15-20 centimeter. I don't know the exact size. And it has been coated by the flux with a metal in between, metal core in between.
Flux, can you tell me the material of flux?
Sir, flux can have oxides of iron, oxides of aluminium, and other titanium, etc.
Why do we add flux? Why flux is required?
Sir, flux serves multi-purposes. Like the purpose is to form a slag coating above the molten metal. So it avoids the contact between the atmosphere and the parent molten metal, thus by avoiding oxidation as much as possible. Second can be that it dissolves the impurities which is in the molten metal and then rises to the surface, which can be then chipped off from the base metal after welding. And third, the flux also provides the density and the surface tension to the metal as required by us.
It increases or decreases the surface tension?
Sir, it depends on the application. Like if we are to have very low viscosity of the molten metal, then the metal will just penetrate through the slight gap that we are having. So, and if it is very high, then it would not penetrate enough. So our flux provides it just enough amount of density so that it can penetrate also and stay in that gap also by not passing through it.
So my question still stands. It increases or decreases the surface tension? Flux.
Sir, I believe that it increases the surface tension to some extent so that the molten metal that is flowing, it can have a contained flow, not a very wild flow, so that
so
the
high
molten metal
surface tension
follows.
Will make the fluid flow easily. Is that what you're saying?
Sir, no, it would restrict the fluid flow to some extent. By that, it will follow our arc's direction only. and it will not flow in any direction that it likes.
Okay, tell me what are the problems associated with overhead welding and how to overcome those problems?
Sir, overhead welding can have several problems. One is the safety of the operator. Like if the operator is welding overhead, the molten metal can fall overhead, and thus by endangering the operator, and it requires a very skilled operator to do the overhead welding. Second, sir, the metal penetration, our welding penetration may end up not being enough. If we are welding overhead, then it is a possibility that
See, overhead
our
welding does not mean you are welding just above your head. It does
yes,
not
sir.
mean that.
Sir, overhead means like it is slightly on the against the gravity. Like we are
Yes,
welding where gravity is not assisting us.
yes, that is the meaning
So
of it.
like sorry for my actions, but like I just wanted to represent it. Like,
तो मेन ट्रबल क्या होता है ओवरहेड वेल्डिंग?
सर मेन ट्रबल हमारा यही होता है कि जो हमारा फ्लूइड फ्लो होता है, जो मोल्टन मेटल का फ्लो होता है, वो हम प्रॉपरली उसे चैनल नहीं कर पाते.
तो कैसे उसको
उसकी
कैसे करते हैं सर?
सर उसके लिए हमारा like I don't know the exact answer, sir, but if I have to speculate, I would say that we require a very skilled operator who can maintain the arc while also not allowing the metal to flow in any direction that is
आपको
unrequired.
आप मेरे को बता सकते हैं मोड ऑफ मेटल ट्रांसफर कौन कौन से होते हैं वेल्डिंग में?
Mode of metal transfer. So there are three types of mode that I can recall. First is spray transfer. In this, very small droplets of molten metal are directly impinged on the base metal. It causes it can cause splatter, and it doesn't have that much deep of a penetration. Second that we have is droplet type of transfer. In this, the molten metal pours down in form of droplets, properly droplets. And so third would be the short circuiting type of welding, which
अब
can
मेरे को
also be used in
ओवरहेड
overhead.
प्रोजेक्ट के ओवरहेड वेल्डिंग के लिए कौन सा मोड यूज करेंगे आप?
Why is short circuiting? That
शॉर्ट
is
सर्किटिंग
just what. Yes, sir.
ओवरहेड के लिए?
Sir, I believe so.
ओवरहेड में तो शॉर्ट सर्किटिंग में तो देयर इज अ लीक कोड कंटेंट इज मोर, साइज इज बिग, इट इज अंडर
Okay,
ग्रेविटी,
sir.
इट इज गोइंग टू फॉल डाउन.
Okay, sir.
ओवरहेड में ग्रेविटी इज नॉट कमिंग टू योर हेल्प.
Okay, sir. Then in that case, if gravity is not helping, then I believe that it should be spray type of welding where the current is carrying the molten metal along with it.
Okay, if there is a very high current flow, what are the welding defects associated?
Sir, in case of a very high current flow, the splatter could increase, which uh, which is also followed by not having enough of penetration. Like if there is a lot of splatter, then the penetration won't be enough. Another that defect that we can face is the huge amount of eddies that is followed by that type of current. That may cause a very unstable arc that we are having. And sir, I can't recall.
Okay, tell me what is the difference between DC and AC source of welding?
Sir, in DC type of welding, we are having a constant current flow from one electrode to another. Rather in AC, the polarity is getting reversed. By this, what I mean is in DC, we can also adjust the type of penetration that we are having. So if we are having a penetration of 60% at one electrode and 30% at another electrode, but in AC the penetration would be absolutely average because the polarity is getting reversed at a regular frequency. Second difference that I can recall is that, sir, while starting the welding and while ending the welding, in DC we can have arc blow that is caused by the eddies that are being formed. But in AC current, the eddies won't be forming in a usual pattern.
How can you remove arc blows?
Sir, arc flows can be removed by 2-3 methods. One is by providing some extra metal at the start and the end of the weld so that our arc remains stable at the end of the weld while it is tilting at the waste metal that we are having. Second method that I can recall is that, sir, we can wrap the wire around the electrode, thus by eliminating the eddies that we are having.
Okay, Abhay, can you tell me something about electro slag welding? What is the advantage of that?
Electroslag welding.
Hmm.
Electroslag welding. Sir, I am not able to recall exactly what is electroslag welding at this moment.
अच्छा, ये एलपीजी सिलेंडर में जो वेल्डिंग करते हैं ये कौन सी होती है?
Sir, it is submerged arc welding.
Why submerge is taken?
So because in submerged arc welding, our welding can be conducted on very deep, very thick plates, while also protecting our arc from any type of oxidation and any type of flaws that can be inducted due to any type of chemical impurities. And as LPG cylinders have to withhold very high pressures for a large amount of time, and they are also conducted with our household safety in mind. So they have to be absolutely perfectly welded without any possible defects.
आप spot welding में kind of electrode which we use, can you tell me what is the material of that?
Sir, in spot welding we use I'm sorry, sir, I'm not able to recall it at this
Can you
moment.
tell me some advantage and disadvantage of spot welding?
Sir, in spot welding, as per of disadvantages, the ones that I can recall are that it is incontinuous. It is non-continuous in nature. While also spot welding can only be done for comparatively thin plates. For very thick plates, spot welding is not very advantageous as it won't allow for much deeper of the penetration, and the weld joint may be very loose. Secondly,
What is
in
the
spot,
temperature in arc welding and gas welding?
sir, in arc welding the temperature is around 5000 degrees Celsius, while in gas welding it can vary from 3200 to 2900 degrees Celsius.
एल्यूमिनियम को वेल्डिंग के लिए कौन सा प्रोसेस यूज करते हैं?
Sir, for welding of aluminium, generally TIG is preferred.
Why not
Like,
arc welding?
sir, in arc welding, the problem is that there are 2-3 problems with that. First of all, aluminium comes with a natural coating of aluminium oxide on it, which has a very high temperature. Rather, the base metal is having a very sharply low temperature of melting. So, if we provide a very high temperature at the arc, the base metal gets a chance to be destroyed completely. Secondly, in arc welding, what the problem that we are facing is if we even remove the metal oxide layer from the aluminium, the metal oxide layer forms very quickly on aluminium, thus by making arc welding kind of redundant on that.
Okay, if I ask you about gas welding, there's a neutral flame which is used in gas welding sometimes. Can you tell me
Yes,
the
sir.
materials for which you use the neutral flame?
So neutral flame can weld mild steel, and our neutral flame can also weld iron, iron products, the pure iron products, sir.
आपने ब्रेजिंग और सोल्डरिंग सुना होगा.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me the material used in brazing and soldering and their applications?
Sir, in soldering we use the material alloy of zinc and lead because their melting temperature is quite low. And rather in brazing we have material that is a mixture of brass and copper alloys, which have comparatively higher temperature of melting.
Can you give some
While
examples of application of brazing?
Sir, brazing, as per I have not seen in my day-to-day application, but as per in my projects, I have used soldering very frequently. Like the project that we conducted during my B.Tech at IIT Delhi, we used soldering to solder together the PCB boards that we were having to create basically a spark creation system.
अभी आपने एक्सप्लोसिव वेल्डिंग के बारे में सुना है क्या?
Yes, sir.
कहाँ पे एप्लीकेशन है उसका?
Sir, explosive welding is used at places where a huge amount of deformation has to be formed in a very low amount of time. This is required at places where we can't go by any other metal forming methods. So specifically in like scientific instrument production or in military applications where we require very strong shells which don't have any much accentuated damages to it. So in explosive we use explosive forming for that.
ये जो हीट एक्सचेंजर में आप पिंस लगाते हो,
Yes sir.
स्टैकिंग करते हो, ये कौन सी वेल्डिंग प्रोसेस से होता है?
सर जो हमारे हीट एक्सचेंजर होते हैं, जैसे इंजन के अंदर जो हमारी फिन्स होती हैं, वो तो हमारे कास्टिंग से ही आती हैं, बट जो हमारा बाकी की जो हीट एक्सचेंजर्स वगैरह होते हैं, उनके अंदर वी कैन यूज ईदर मिग और वी कैन इवन यूज आर्क वेल्डिंग इन दैट.
ओके, जो आपका आर्क वेल्डिंग में आपका वेल्ड जंक्शन बनता है, उसमें व्हाट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ पेनिट्रेशन?
सर पेनिट्रेशन is the distance up to which the joint has been perfectly made or the metal has fused properly.
It should
So
be
if
more
we
or
are
less.
having, sir, what?
It should be more or less.
So penetration should be as high as possible so that the joint is made as uniformly as possible.
अच्छा, प्लाज्मा आर्क वेल्डिंग की क्या डिसएडवांटेज है?
Sir, in plasma arc welding, the major disadvantage that we are facing is that the base metal could get charged and it can get oxidized, it can react with the gases that are in the atmosphere. Secondly, the in plasma arc welding, the depth of the penetration of the arc is not very much. We can't weld very thick plates through it, though it is very useful in welding very thin plates, but we can't weld any much thick plates through it.
Can you tell me the electrode used in TIG welding and MIG welding? Abhay?
Sir, in TIG welding, we use tungsten electrode, which is a non-consumable type electrode. But in MIG welding, we can use consumable electrodes and non-consumable electrodes alike. Like it can be up to us for that.
What do you mean by flux core electrode?
Sir, in flux core electrode, we have the flux at the center of the electrode, while the metallic portion forms the shell around the flux. By that we mean that in general electrodes we see the metallic core with the flux surrounding it, but in flux core electrodes it is the other way around.
अच्छा, ये जो कांस्टेंट करंट कैरेक्टरिस्टिक और कांस्टेंट वोल्टेज कैरेक्टरिस्टिक है, इसको क्यों यूज करते हैं हम? व्हाट आर द एप्लीकेशंस?
I'm sorry sir, but I'm unable to recall them.
अच्छा, can you name some 5 welding defects?
Sir, any 5 welding defects, sir? First would be splatter. Sir, second would be the arc blows. Third would be insufficient penetration.
What is the name of that?
Fourth might be uneven weld. Sir, uneven amount
ये तो
of weld.
नाम नहीं हुए, ये तो तुम प्रोसेस एक्सप्लेन कर रहे हो. I want names.
Splatter, then there would be, so there can be incursion of slag in the molten metal that we are having.
Have you heard about weld cast processes?
Weld cast processes.
The welding processes which are just resembling casting processes.
No sir, I am not aware of
इसमें
that.
molten metal flow करता है casting की तरह.
Sir, I can recall one type of welding that might resemble this, but I am not sure that it is called the weld cast process. Thermite welding is a process that, yes sir, thermite welding closely
कहाँ use
resembles
होती है
to the
thermite welding?
Sir, thermite welding we use in basically the welding of rails, where we require a very huge amount of metal and huge amount of heat to join two very thick rails together uniformly.
What is the source of energy in thermite welding?
Sir, it is chemical reaction that we are having between iron oxide and aluminium.
Can you tell me the difference between casting and welding process?
Sir, in casting process, we completely melt the parent material that we are having to get the final product. Rather, welding process is like joining, while casting process is more like forming a very new thing about it.
In which case do you get more strength, casting or welding?
Sir, in welding, we get more strength.
Are you sure about that?
Yes, sir.
What is the reason of not getting strength in casting?
Sir, in casting there can be certain amounts of defect that we have. Plus there is also the nature of cooling that we are having in casting, which can affect the basic grain growth and the grain structure in the casting that we are having, making it much more brittler than welding that we have.
अच्छा, अबे ये कास्ट आयरन का नाम ऐसा क्यों पड़ा है? Why it is called cast iron? Is it easy to cast or something?
Sir, I am not aware of this thing.
Can you tell me what is the meaning of flowability?
So flowability is basically the property of the molten metal to flow in the casting. If the flowability is high, then it is easier for the molten metal to flow inside the casting. While if it is low, that means the molten metal is quite viscous in its type of composition and it is difficult for it to flow in very thin areas of casting.
And how do you measure flowability?
Sir, flowability, I'm not aware of the exact method by which we can measure it, but if I have to guess, then I would guess that it can be measured in form of viscosity itself. Like we would have a
Have you heard
standard
about
type of
rod test?
rod test. No, sir, I'm not aware of it.
अच्छा, ये बताइए जो कास्टिंग प्रोसेस है इसमें सबसे कॉमनली यूज्ड कास्टिंग प्रोसेस कौन सी है? मोस्ट कॉमनली यूज्ड कास्टिंग प्रोसेस?
Sir, most commonly used casting process that we have also seen in our colleges that sand mold casting, in which we have a pattern made out of wood, and then we have backing sand and other type of sand mold made out of it. Then we fill in the cast. Then we fill in the mold with the
It is
molten
called
metal.
green sand mold, right?
Yes, sir.
Why it is called green sand?
So because that type of sand has moisture in it.
So that is a good thing or bad thing? Moisture.
Sir, it depends on our application basically.
Okay.
Like we
How
can
do you
have
define the strength of the soil or sand?
Sir, can you please repeat?
How do you define the strength of the sand?
The strength of the sand can be defined as the resistance of sand to deform from its particular position. Like if we have put a pattern in it, then whether it collapses or not, it is type of that strength.
How can you increase the strength of the sand?
So the relationship between strength of the sand and moisture goes like an inverted U type. So if we just add correct amount of moisture and binders in it, then we can increase the strength of the stand. But if we add too much of the moisture and binder in it, the strength of the stand might eventually get reduced, then get
So
increased.
adding moisture or binder is the only way to increase the strength, or there is another way also?
Sir, we can also do ramming in it, but by ramming we also run into chances of decreasing the permeability of the sand, and thus by making it very hard and very unpermeable for the gases to outflow.
So ramming decreases permeability or more moisture content decreases permeability?
Sir, both play quite a essential role in it, but in comparison to moisture, I believe ramming decreases the permeability more, because when we pour the molten metal in it, then the moisture can get evaporated along with the gases, providing them the spaces. But in ramming, we decrease the very intermolecular spaces that are required for the gases to escape.
Okay, what do you know about gating design?
Gating design. So gating, when we have a casting with us, so for the fluid, for the molten metal to flow properly in it and avoid turbulences and other type of incursions in it, we provided gates in it. And this type of pattern that we use to help the molten metal flow is basically the gating pattern that we have.
Can you tell me component of gating system?
Sir, first would be the spruce that we have. The spruce is the most essential part, because from there the molten metal gets into the welding. Then we have the basin, the downward basin. We have the skimming bob, which can be sometimes avoided. It is not essential to include it. Then we have the gates and runners.
In gate, huh?
Yes, sir.
Why in gate are provided?
Sir, in-gates are provided to us so that the molten metal flows without any turbulence. The flow of molten metal is even and is laminar in its shape, so that no gases can get accumulated in the molten metal
So,
while
Abhi,
it
is
is.
there any ratio between the size of screw, runner, and in gate?
Sir, if I am remembering it correctly, the ratio is somewhere around 1:4:4, but like I can't put my finger
This
exactly
ratio
on
depends upon
the.
what?
I'm sorry, sir, but I am not exactly aware of it.
You know, there is something which is called riser.
Yes,
What
sir.
is the application of riser? Why do we use it?
So when we are cooling down the metal, it goes through three phases of its shrinkage. First is the shrinkage due to turning from liquid to solid, like the liquid is getting cooled and it is shrinking in volume. The second the second type of shrinkage that we are having is the phase change shrinkage, that is from liquid to solid. So the particular reason for providing the riser is to compensate for these two types of shrinkages that we are having. The riser is designed in such a way that the molten metal in the riser gets cooled down at the last in comparison to the casting that we are having.
And what can be the best shape of riser?
So theoretically, the best shape of riser can be a sphere because its volume to surface area ratio is the least. But practically, we use inverted tapers or the cylindrical types of risers.
Why not spherical?
So because in spherical we run into chances of actually doing opposite what we are intending to do, because when the metal starts to get cooled down, it will get cooled down from its surface towards the center, and in sphere the center is quite away from the casting itself.
So we are
So
not bothered about that, because that is going to be waste material in the riser.
so
That
the
is
actual point of contact that we are having, like, I am just putting down the mic for a second, sir. So like if we are having sphere like this and our casting is like this, so our sphere will start getting cooled from this surface. The molten metal above it would be still molten, but the surface would be getting starting to get solidified.
ऐसा क्यों?
So like it is basically the property to cool down from surface towards the center.
लेकिन नीचे बॉटम में तो कोई सरफेस नहीं है, नीचे तो मोल्टन मेटल है.
सर हमारा प्रॉपरली स्फीयर है, तो फिर
तो
वो
सेमी
प्रॉपरली.
स्फेरिकल ले लो. टेक सेमी स्फेरिकल riser.
Sir, semi-spherical is also preferred sometimes, but the problem that we run into that is the surface area and volume ratios then get highly unproportionate in comparison to inverted tapers and
How many
cylindricals.
risers do you prefer? How many risers in one mold cavity can be used?
Sir, it can depend upon the application basically. So if we are having a huge type of casting that is having many places to cool down from, then we can have multiple risers also. But if it is a singular type of casting like a cube or a very simple shape, then we can also have a simple one riser to compensate for all it.
So Abhay, why do you prefer top gate instead of bottom gate?
So top gate instead of bottom gate. So if sir, in my opinion, we should prefer bottom gate instead of top gate.
अगर हमें जल्दी से फिलिंग करनी हो तो?
So then we prefer top gate because but like in my practical experience and like from wherever I have studied, sir, from my teachers.
अच्छा चलो, लेट मी आस्क यू दिस वे, फेरस और नॉन फेरस में टॉप गेट किस में यूज करते हैं? फेरस में या नॉन फेरस में?
Sir, in ferrous and non-ferrous top gate. Sir, so basically the top gate casting is used in cases of small castings till as point of application that I am remembering. Top gate casting we use in type of small castings where our metal directly flows into the casting and our gate itself serves as a riser type of a geometry. So I
और
believe in non-ferrous we would be using top gate much more than in ferrous.
melting point and pouring temperature.
Yes, sir.
इसके बीच में difference is more in ferrous or non-ferrous?
Sir, in ferrous it is more because
Ferrous
sir,
it is more. Why?
sir, yes, I believe it is more in ferrous
Why?
because the ferrous metals tend to be a little viscous, and by
But melting
increasing the
temperature is
pouring.
already high in ferrous, right? Any idea what is the melting temperature for
Oh,
ferrous?
sorry, sir. Sir, I believe that in non-ferrous that we are having higher pouring temperatures because they tend to cool down very easily.
Acha, if pouring temperature is kept high,
Yes, sir.
then what is the advantage and what is the disadvantage?
Sir, in case of pouring temperature being high, we have the advantages of having a high flowability of metal, so that each and every nook and cranny of our casting is completely filled with the molten metal. But the main disadvantage that we are facing is that the turbulence will eventually increase, which might also increase the gases that are getting trapped in the metal, the outside impurities that are also getting trapped in the metal.
That is
Thus,
called
by
turbulence or something else. If the pouring temperature is high, what defect in welding comes?
sir, the pouring temperature is high. I'm sorry, sir, but I am unable to recall it at this moment.
Have you heard about aspiration?
Aspiration. Yes, sir.
What is that?
Sir, aspiration is a process in which the gases are being led out of the molten metal while it's solidifying.
Or is it the reverse? Suction effect of atmospheric gases.
Aspiration. So, sir, I'm not sure about it, but I believe that it is the exhaust of gases from the molten metal.
अच्छा मेरे को कुछ casting defects के नाम बताओ.
Sir, we can have casting defects of blowholes, then we can have hot tears in our casting. We can also have slag incursion. I'm sorry, not slag incursion, but impurity incursion, which can be caused due to breakage of the casting mold itself, some casting mold itself. Then we have pinholes. We also
What is a
have
rat tail?
rat tail. Sir, rat tail is formed when suddenly the mold gets lifted from some point, and a small type of imperfection is formed, which is very thin and in form of a line. It is quite resembling to a rat tail, thus its name that way.
You must have heard about some special casting processes, right?
Yes, sir.
One is investment casting.
Yes, sir.
Why it is called investment casting and what are the applications?
Sir, investment casting is called so because m- the material that we are coating it, the material that we are using in making the mold is basically formed by regularly dipping it into the liquid material that we are having. So by dipping it again and again, it is kind of an investment that we are making on that particular mold and making it thicker. So in that form, it is
Are you
investment
sure about
casting.
it or you're just telling?
Sir, this is the way that I
Investment of
remembered it.
time or cost?
Sir, no, investment of the material on the mold.
That is not called investment.
So
Investment is something
this
which is
is
related to cost. Or you can say
okay.
time invested.
Okay, sir. Sir, like this is how I
किस चीज में
remember
डालते
the
हैं आप
basic.
उसको जो आप डाल रहे हो
Yes,
किस चीज
sir.
में डालते हैं वो व्हाट इज दैट कॉल्ड
Sir, it is a slurry that we are having of. It can be of ceramic or it can be even of some clay. That slurry get deposited on it again and again, and this I related to investment in my mind, so this is how I remember.
एप्लीकेशन क्या है इन्वेस्टमेंट कास्टिंग का
Sir, it can be used for it can be used for mass producing a type of casting. Like we have a pattern tree on which various type of pattern that we are making are there.
व्हाट इज द मटेरियल ऑफ
So
पैटर्न
wax, sir,
वैक्स भी यूज है
which can be easily evaporated and can get exhaust out from the investment and our mold itself.
you must have heard about shell mold casting also
Shell mold casting, yes sir.
कुछ एप्लीकेशन बता सकते हैं उसका?
Sir, shell mold casting is used in processes where we require high amount of precision, but it is a small size casting. So like we take the pattern, we how can I explain, like sir, we take a small casting and then we invert it into a mixture of ceramic and other type of clay mixture. Then when after a particular time we invert it again, thus a specific thickness shell is formed with us, and then we take out the pattern and pour the hot metal in it, thus by providing us with a very detailed, a high surface finish casting, but for one the shell which is being expended after every use.
अबे ये जो गैस टरबाइन के ब्लेड्स होते हैं ना,
Yes sir.
ये कौन सी कास्टिंग से बनते हैं?
Sir, in gas turbine blades, they are basically made out of single crystal. They are basically a single crystal blade in gas turbines that we are having. So in that, I believe it is made from. Sir, let me just try to recall it. Gas turbine blades.
आप डेंटिस्ट के पास गए होंगे कई बार?
Yes sir.
उनके टूल्स होते हैं डेंटिस्ट के,
Yes sir.
शार्प, वो कौन
Yes,
सी
sir.
कास्टिंग से बनते हैं?
Sir, I believe that they are made of shell mold casting itself, I think, because the surface finish is very good in that, and they are also small in size.
Better
like
than
they
that
fit
is
the
in
criteria.
investment casting. Better surface quality than shell mold casting is in investment casting. You agree? इन्वेस्टमेंट कास्टिंग में बहुत अच्छी सरफेस क्वालिटी मिलती है.
Sir, but I think that the better quality would be in shell mold casting with us, because
ऐसा
in
क्यों?
that we are using ceramic as our base material in shell mold. Rather in investment casting, we can use anything between ceramic and clay.
Okay.
So like, and the main purpose of investment casting is making mass producing goods that are comparatively cheaper in cost. Like, this is my reasoning behind it, but I am not aware of the correct answer, sir. I might be wrong in this.
अच्छा, आपने ट्रैक्टर देखा होगा, राइट?
Yes sir.
ट्रैक्टर एज अ एग्रीकल्चरल टूल,
Yes sir.
उसके मेजॉरिटी कंपोनेंट्स जो होते हैं ना, वो एक पर्टिकुलर कास्टिंग प्रोसेस से बनाए जाते हैं.
Okay sir.
क्या मटेरियल होता है उनका और कौन सी कास्टिंग प्रोसेस से बनते हैं?
The tractor requires high amount of strength with us because it has to be used in rugged type of environment. So we would be requiring a material like steel or iron alloys to fit the criteria.
Why shall you
I
use
would have to
cast iron
speculate.
instead of steel?
Sir, cast iron provides high amount of compressive strength in comparison to steel.
What
Like,
else?
and also, sir, the cast iron, when it fails, it breaks. It has a brittle fracture rather than a ductile fracture. So in a agricultural type of environment where we are using it for very rugged type of things, if a fracture occurs, then we want to see it immediately, rather than having it a ductile and trying to getting repaired and going through all that trouble. We would like to see it directly.
आपने इरिगेशन पाइप्स देखी हैं क्या? एग्रीकल्चर में यूज होते हैं इरिगेशन पाइप. दे आर
I'm
आल्सो
sorry, sir,
कॉल्ड
but I
सीआई
have
पाइप,
never.
कास्ट आयरन पाइप,
I
सीआई
have.
पाइप्स, लोहे की पाइप्स, पानी वाली.
Yes, sir, that I have seen.
वो कौन सी कास्टिंग प्रोसेस से बनती हैं?
Sir, for forming pipes, we can use true centrifugal process. In
ट्रू
that we
सेंट्रीफ्यूज
have
और
just a
सेंट्रीफ्यूगल
second,
कास्टिंग.
centrifuge, semi-centrifuge, true centrifuge. So there is a slight confusion between centrifugal and true
चलो
centrifuge
सेंट्रीफ्यूगल
that I am
कास्टिंग क्या है
having.
बताओ.
Sir, I'm having a little confusion in names currently. So in one type of casting, we are having the molten metal getting poured through a cylindrical section while also rotating it, so that the molten metal gets covered easily in the along the cylindrical walls, thereby forming the pipes. Rather, in another type of centrifugal application, we fill the mold cavity completely with the molten metal and spin it very fast, so that the molten metal gets filled in the edges, so thereby making symmetrical castings with us. And also it can be used in form of like making different type of castings where the molten metal is getting deposited in the pattern which is at the outer edges of the circle that we are having. The advantage that we are having by such type of casting is that the impurities that get separated on the top of towards the center of the rotation, thereby making a very strong and very durable type of casting with us.
अच्छा, अभी कुछ डाई कास्टिंग के बारे में बताओ.
Sir, in die casting we use permanent dies made of metal to basically cast our castings. It can be only used for small items basically, because if we use it in large type of casting, we run into problem that the metal die itself could melt. Oh no, sorry. Die die casting. Yeah, die casting
That is
is
also
hot die
called
casting
permanent
and
mold casting.
can you repeat, sir?
That is also called permanent mold casting. Die casting.
Permanent. Yeah. So in that our particular pattern is that die can be used again and again to produce the casting, for mass producing the casting. Here the mold is not expendable, so like we can pour the hot metal in it and we can mass produce it. Like in sand mold casting, what we are facing the problem is that after one use the sand mold has to be destroyed and it has to be made again. But in die casting or permanent mold casting, we have the die to be reused again and again.
So do you have some classification of die casting? दो तरह की.
Sir, yes, in die casting we have a hot die casting and a cold die casting. So in hot die casting, what we are having is that it is particularly used for non-ferrous type of metals, where our molten metal is there in the furnace, and our piston pressurize the molten metal to flow to a die. By this, we can again and again form the casting which we are having. Rather, in cold type of die casting, we have to bring the molten metal to our apparatus and then we pour it in the piston.
अच्छा, मेरे को
After
तो
which,
मैग्नीशियम के लिए कौन सा यूज करोगे? हॉट और
sir,
कोल्ड?
for magnesium, I believe that it is a non-ferrous metal, so we would be using hot die casting.
And for ferrous?
So for ferrous, it would be cold die casting.
Are you sure die casting is used for ferrous?
Sir, we can use it for ferrous alloys in particular applications only, like for forming very small castings, which uses very low amount of molten material.
और लेड के लिए कौन सा यूज करोगे? हॉट या कोल्ड?
Sir, hot.
और एल्यूमिनियम के लिए?
Sir, again, I believe we would be using hot die casting because it is non-ferrous. That is the only reasoning that I am having behind it.
अच्छा, आपने ये नाम सुना होगा ना, कोप, ड्रैग.
Cope drag, yes, sir.
एक चीक भी होता है.
Cheek.
कोप, ड्रैग एंड चीक. Any idea what is cheek?
Sir, if I have to speculate, like I am not able to remember that particular term correctly. So if I have to speculate, then it would be the middle part of the casting.
Yes.
Like if the
Yes.
casting is very big,
Yes.
then the top is cope, the bottom is drag, and the middle stages that we are having, they are cheek.
अच्छा, ये गेटिंग सिस्टम किस में होता है, कोप में या ड्रैग में?
Sir, if we are using the bottom type of gating system, then it would be in drag. If we are using a top type of gating system, then it would be in cope.
और राइजर को किस में रखा जाता है, कोप में या ड्रैग में?
Sir, it is again also depending on our application, because riser can also be provided at the sides of the casting depending upon the application. So it can be either in cope, it can be either in drag.
आप मेरे को चिल के बारे में बता सकते हैं, चिल क्या होता है?
Sir, so if we have very intricate type of casting that we are having,
Mm.
which have very sharp edges or complicated geometry, some like that.
Mm.
Sometimes what happen is by cooling,
Mm.
some corners might get cooled immediately and some corners might not get cooled immediately, or otherwise if we have to influence the crystal growth in it,
Mm.
like if we have to induce some type of crystal growth from the place where we want, we use metal pieces along the corners, which provides a outlet for the heat to be immediately getting dispersed out into the molding, into
Mm.
the mold that we are having.
Mm.
That is
Okay.
particularly
And
the
what is
use of
chaplets?
chills. Sir, chaplets are metal parts that are used to support the core.
Mm.
So these type of chaplets are basically made of the parent metal itself, so
Mm.
that while they are in the molten metal, they can easily get melted along it, and also support the core while the liquid metal is getting solidified
Mm.
till the time that the metal is able to support the core itself.
Mm. And Abhay, what is parting sand?
So parting sand is, if I'm remembering it right, it is a sand basically consisting of very fine silica or clay.
Mm.
It is used to part the cope and the drag. So while removing the both of the pieces against each other, the cope doesn't accidentally fall on the drag, and like it can be parted very easily.
Mm.
If I have to compare, it can be compared to the lines of the oil that we put in the pan before baking, so that the cake is getting easily separated from the pan itself.
Mm. अच्छा, अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं मास प्रोडक्शन के लिए कौन सी वेल्डिंग प्रोसेस यूज करोगे?
मास प्रोडक्शन के सर वेल्डिंग प्रोसेस,
कौन सी
सर
ऐसी
वेल्डिंग
वेल्डिंग प्रोसेस
प्रोसेस,
जो मास प्रोडक्शन के लिए यूज कर सकते हैं?
sir, if it is a thin type of welding, then it would be recommended to use resistance welding or spot welding.
हम्म। अच्छा,
The
अगर
seam
मैं बोलूं
welding,
अनस्किल्ड लेबरर कहाँ यूज कर सकते हैं, वेल्डिंग में या कास्टिंग में, जो ज्यादा स्किल्ड ना हो?
sir, in welding we still require some amount of skill, because it is having a high chance of getting disproportionate. Like
हम्म।
in my practical experience while we were in workshop, it was harder to get a weld correctly than to get a cast incorrectly. So
हम्म।
in casting, we are having support of various items like alignment pins, and also the pattern is pre-made. We just had to ram it together. Even some type of errors can be absorbed due to the allowances that are provided in casting.
हम्म।
But in welding, we had to get the penetration, the flow, and the arc length exactly correctly. Otherwise, the weld get absolutely useless, basically.
And Abhay, this welding process is not only used for joining; it is also used for cutting.
Yes, sir.
So, can you give me some example of welding where it is used as a cutting process?
Sir, welding can be used as cutting process when we are using the gas welding. So instead of letting the hot metal touch each other and fuse together, we use the gases at high pressure to blow away the metal.
Hmm.
Similar is the case when we are using any other melting process. So basically in welding, what we are doing is that we are imparting heat and also waiting for the metal to get together.
Hmm.
But if we just impart a heat at high temperature, impart heat at a very high rate while also blowing away the metal, the same process can be easily, very easily be used to use for cutting.
Hmm.
It is same for the arc cutting process. It is same for the gas cutting process. It is even same for the laser beam cutting process.
Hmm. So, if I'm using electric beam welding, what is the meaning of that? Electronic beam welding.
Sir, in electronic beam welding, it is used for very specialized purposes,
Hmm.
because it is very hard to do and it requires a very special amount of apparatus for that.
Hmm.
Using for space applications and very minute applications for that, electronic beam welding basically creates a vacuum environment. Excuse me. Electron beam welding creates a vacuum type of environment. We put the base metals together, and then we have a focused electron ray applied on that gap.
Hmm.
Thus by making a very small heat affected zone and joining the metal together each other.
Hmm. Anything can you tell me for underground water welding? Underwater
for underwater welding, we use plasma arc welding also. Like plasma arc welding is quite a helpful way, which is also used for the deep sea drivers and oil rigs for joining the deep pipes and stuff like that. For underground welding, we cannot use the gas welding or any other process like that, because in water the conductivity of water is quite high, thus by providing the plasma to flow very easily to the base metal that we are having.
Amit, do you know what is duty cycle?
Sir, if we are using a machine, then we don't particularly use it for the full time. Like there is time that is gone in preparation, there is time that is gone in putting together the metal together. Like the actual amount of time that the machine is used for a particular job is quite less in comparison. So duty cycle is the measure of average use time per 5 minutes per job.
Per
So
5 minutes
like
or
if
per 10 minutes?
sir, per 5 minutes,
जैसे
like I
एग्जांपल दो,
remember it per 5 minutes.
5 मिनट के अंदर मतलब कितनी देर हमने चलाया, वो ड्यूटी साइकिल है.
Yes sir. कितनी
जैसे
देर हम
सपोज
यूज कर सकते हैं?
कितना होता है ड्यूटी साइकिल नॉर्मली?
Sir, the machines that like if I remember it correctly from our welding instructor that we have in our workshop, he told us that the duty cycle of particular arc welding that we are having is around 60%.
अच्छा, कुछ इसका आइडिया है आपको? ओपन सर्किट वोल्टेज, शॉर्ट सर्किट करंट, इनकी वैल्यूज?
Sir, open circuit. Sir, the voltage of a typical electric arc machine is around 30 to 40 volts.
वो तो रनिंग वोल्टेज है. That is
Okay.
running voltage.
Okay sir. So then I am not aware of this. Sorry.
80 वोल्ट होता है, 80 वोल्ट
Okay sir.
ओपन सर्किट वोल्टेज. और शॉर्ट सर्किट करंट नॉर्मली?
So short circuit current normally is around 100 to 150 ampere, I guess.
डिफाइन कैसे करते हैं शॉर्ट सर्किट करंट को?
Sir, when we are welding and if our electrode is completely submerged in the molten metal, so that there is no breakage between the flow of electrons from the electrode to the molten material, then it would be a short circuit current.
आपने देखा होगा ना, कई बार वेल्डिंग करते करते टच हो जाता है वो और स्टिक कर जाता है उसके साथ. ऐसा क्यों होता है? Why that happens? अबे
Sir, the point is that like this is something that I have also tried in our welding workshop. So for initiating the arc, what we do is we try to touch it and remove it once in a while. So what happens is that when we touch, a very small arc is formed and a very small molten area is formed. If we don't remove it and form the arc, then that molten material will also cool down very rapidly and get the electrode stuck on the base material. So for basically the starting of the arc welding process, we we touch and very rapidly remove it away, while also not increasing the distance to such a large extent that the arc gets extinguished. So the basic reason that the electrode is getting stuck on the parent material is that when we touch it, a very short spark is initiated, which melts a very small amount of metal on the electrode, and if we are not able to remove it very fast, then the metal will cool down and it will get the electrode stuck on it.
Okay, Abhay, my last question to you is related to personal protective equipment.
Okay, sir.
So what PPE, personal protective equipment, should be used while going for welding process?
Sir, so this is something that we get constantly berated over in our welding workshop also. So we should use very thick gloves with a face mask of having a window with ample protection against the arc radiation that are being used. We must also use the apron that we are having, and also we must take care that we are covered from head to toe in pure cotton substance if possible, not in synthetic, because in case of any small spark flying on our clothes, it is easier to remove the cotton rather than removing the synthetic, which might get eventually stuck.
सबसे ज्यादा हार्म आइस को होता है वेल्डिंग करते टाइम।
Yes sir.
एक रेडिएशन निकलती है, कौन सी
Yes, sir.
रेडिएशन होती है जो आइस को हार्म करती है?
Sir, it is UVA radiation. UVA, UVB, UVC. I think it is UVA radiation.
तो अपने आप को आइस को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए वो व्हाट डू यू यूज? इज अ
So
शील्ड।
the face mask or the shield that I was talking about earlier, with a very small window and a highly darkened glass, which is dark enough to block most of the radiation from the welding arc.
What about shoes?
So the shoes should also be very thick, and they should provide ample of protection against the splatter that is coming from the
Only splatter or electrocution also?
So thick shoes will also in turn provide.
ठीक, तो मैं तुम्हें मेटल के शूज दे देता हूँ. That will not prevent the electrocution. So you need to tell me some material, you know.
Sir, thick shoes with the rubber sole, with very thick rubber sole, so that we don't in turn get electrocuted.
Okay.